I never really thought much about my stepmom, not in a bad way, but she was always distant, caught up in her own world. When she married my dad, I didn't expect us to get close. She was this beautiful, poised woman who always seemed to have everything under control. I admired her from afar, respecting her space, and kept a polite distance. But as time passed, something between us changed. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. Dad was out of town for the weekend, and the house was quiet. I wandered through the rooms, not really expecting to find anyone, until I heard faint sounds coming from the stables out back. My stepmom loved spending time with the horses. She could spend hours brushing them, tending to them, talking softly in their ears. Curious, I made my way over. As I approached the stable, I saw her. She stood next to one of the horses, her fingers gently running down its sleek neck, her touch tender and focused. There was something serene about the way she moved, her body swaying slightly in rhythm with the horse's breathing. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before, something almost vulnerable, but at the same time calm and composed. I leaned against the stable door, watching her from a distance. There was a quiet connection between her and the animal that seemed so intimate, so different. Her fingers traced slow patterns along the horse's side, her attention completely absorbed. She didn't know I was there, and I couldn't pull my eyes away. I must have made a noise because suddenly she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and for a few long moments, we just stared at each other. The silence between us was heavy, filled with something unspoken. I didn't know what to do, my heart racing. But then she smiled softly, easing the strange tension that had built up. "I didn't realize you were home," she said, her voice soft and steady. I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Just got back." She stepped closer, her hand still resting on the horse, her eyes never leaving mine. There was something different about her today, something warmer, more open. The usual distance between us seemed to have disappeared. As she stood there, I could feel her presence more than ever. The warmth of her body, the soft scent of her perfume mixing with the earthy smell of the stable. "Do you like horses?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I guess." "I haven't really thought about it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She took another step toward me, reaching out and taking my hand, guiding it to the horse's neck. "Feel that?" she whispered. "How strong they are, but so calm at the same time. They sense things without needing words." Her hand rested lightly on top of mine, her touch soft but sure. The way she spoke, the way she looked at me, it felt so intimate, almost like we were sharing something we weren't supposed to. Our hands pressed together on the horse's warm coat, and I could feel the closeness of her body, her hair lightly brushing my arm. For a moment, everything else faded. There was just her, standing so close, her eyes watching me, her hand still on mine. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. The tension between us was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind that made my heart race, the kind that left me wanting more. We stood like that for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving. Then she took a step back, the warmth of her touch leaving me suddenly cold. "You should come out here more often," she said, her voice soft as she turned back toward the horse, her hand once again stroking its mane. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to process what had just happened. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time we passed each other in the house after that, there was this unspoken tension. We never talked about the moment in the stable, but it was always there, lingering between us. She started spending more time in the stables, and I found myself joining her. At first, we worked in silence, brushing the horses, feeding them, cleaning out the stalls. But the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with something more, something we both felt but didn't acknowledge. Every time our hands brushed, every time our eyes met, that same tension returned, stronger than before. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the stable, she turned to me, stepping closer. Her hand rested on my arm, her fingers lightly trailing down to my hand. "You've changed," she said softly, her voice low and husky. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. She gave me that same soft, knowing smile. "You know exactly what I mean." Before I could respond, she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine so lightly it was almost a whisper of a touch. The feeling sent a shockwave through me, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Instead, I kissed her back, my hands finding their way to her waist, pulling her closer. The world around us seemed to disappear. The kiss was soft at first, tender, but then it deepened, as if everything we had been holding back was finally being released. It felt like we had been waiting for this moment forever, like something between us had finally snapped and there was no going back. When we pulled away, we were both breathless, our eyes locked. There was no need for words. Everything we felt, everything we wanted, was clear in that moment. From that day on, everything changed. The tension that had been building for so long finally broke, and we both knew we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But instead of feeling wrong, it felt right, natural even. We spent more and more time together. Every stolen glance, every touch felt like a secret we shared, a connection that grew deeper with each passing day. We never talked about what we were, never put a label on it. We didn't need to. The way we acted around each other, the way we gravitated toward each other, it said everything. She wasn't just my stepmom anymore. She was the woman I couldn't stop thinking about, the woman I wanted to be with. And as much as I tried to push those thoughts away, I couldn't deny it anymore. The days that followed were a mix of confusion and longing. We both knew what had happened in the stable wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was something more, something that had been building for a long time, unspoken, but always there beneath the surface. I could feel it every time we crossed paths, every time our eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a tension that neither of us knew how to address. And yet, we couldn't seem to stay away from each other. We started spending more time together, sometimes in the stables, sometimes around the house when Dad was away. It wasn't just about the physical connection, though. There was something deeper. Something about the way she looked at me. The way her eyes softened when we were alone. The way she opened up in ways she never had before. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting in the kitchen, sharing a quiet cup of coffee. The house was empty, and the silence between us felt different. It wasn't the charged silence we were used to. It was comfortable, almost tender. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, her eyes distant, as if lost in thought. "You've grown so much," she said softly, breaking the quiet. Her voice held a hint of something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. "It's strange how time passes, how people change." I looked at her, studying the way her hair fell loosely around her face, the way her fingers traced the edge of the cup. "You've changed too," I replied, my voice low. "You seem different, closer." She smiled at that, a soft, almost wistful smile. "Maybe I am. It's not easy blending families, trying to find a place where you belong. I've always been a bit on the outside." I hadn't thought about that before, about how hard it must have been for her. I always assumed she was fine, always so composed, so in control. But now, sitting there with her, I saw something else. A vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "You belong," I said quietly, my words feeling heavier than I expected. "You've always belonged." She looked up at me then, her eyes softening, filled with something I couldn't quite name. "It doesn't always feel that way," she whispered. "But thank you for saying that." The words hung between us, and for a moment it felt like the room had grown smaller, the air between us thickening. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to somehow show her that she wasn't alone, that I understood, even if I didn't know how to say it. "I never wanted to replace your mom," she continued after a moment, her voice fragile. "I just wanted to be here for you, for your dad. But sometimes I wonder if I failed at that." "You haven't," I said quickly, surprising myself with the intensity of my own words. "You've been good to us, to me." She looked at me again, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to read what I wasn't saying out loud. "You've grown into someone so thoughtful, so strong. I didn't expect this connection between us. It's complicated." "Yeah," I breathed. "It is." The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying, every glance, every touch, every moment that had passed between us. There was so much unsaid, so much hanging in the air. And I realized then that I cared about her more than I had ever admitted to myself. In the days that followed, our connection deepened. We found ourselves gravitating toward each other, not just in the quiet moments, but in the everyday things. She would touch my arm lightly as she passed me in the hallway, her hand lingering for just a second longer than necessary. I found myself watching her more closely, noticing the little things, the way her eyes softened when she smiled, the way she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. One evening, we were sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamps casting a warm light over the space. She was reading, and I was pretending to watch TV, but my attention kept drifting to her. She seemed more relaxed lately, more comfortable in my presence. The distance that had once been there was gone, replaced by something warmer, more intimate. After a while, she set her book down and turned to me. "Do you ever think about what this means?" she asked softly. I looked at her, unsure of how to answer. "What do you mean?" "This connection between us," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I don't know where it's leading, but it feels like something we can't ignore. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I think about it a lot, I admitted. It feels like things have changed so much, and I don't know how to handle it. She sighed softly, leaning back against the couch. I didn't expect to feel this way, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I do, and I don't know what to do with it. I swallowed hard, my heart racing as I looked at her. There was something so real, so raw about the way she spoke. She wasn't just my stepmom anymore. She was someone I cared about, someone I was connected to in a way I couldn't fully understand. And as much as I tried to push those feelings away, I couldn't. Maybe we don't have to know what to do, I said softly. Maybe we just feel it. Let it be what it is. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something deep, something that made my chest tighten. And what is it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. What is this? I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put it into words. But then I realized I didn't have to. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, and for a moment we just sat there, the warmth of her touch grounding me. I don't know what this is, I whispered, but I know it's real. Her eyes softened as she squeezed my hand gently, her thumb brushing lightly over my skin. It is, she agreed, and maybe that's enough for now. We sat like that for a long time, our hands entwined, the silence between us comfortable, full of the things we couldn't yet say. There was no need for labels, no need to define what we were. All that mattered was that we were here, together, sharing something deeper than either of us had expected. As the night grew darker, we stayed close, the unspoken bond between us growing stronger with every passing moment. Whatever this was, it was more than just a fleeting connection. It was something that had changed both of us. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fight it. I realized then that we didn't need all the answers right away. Sometimes it was enough to just be present in the moment, to let things unfold as they would. And in that moment, sitting beside her, I knew that whatever happened next, we would figure it out together,